for those smaller banks out there, what can they do once their customers start moving to those larger banks?
That's an important question right now because there's been a lot of move from the smaller community banks to the larger trillionaire or super regional banks recently. A bit because of the Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank problems, a little bit of flight to what they think is safety. They're wrong about this because the FDIC insures every bank deposit to $250,000 regardless of the bank. But there are some folks who are moving up to larger banks recently. So it's been a bit of a struggle for some of the community banks, and that's why there's a lot of competition on rates right now. That's a really important question right now, since there's a lot of market share that's been shifting actually from the smaller banks to the bigger banks. Recently, because of some trust levels, there was a number of, a certain percentage of people who felt that it was safer to go with the larger banks after the recent bank failures. Of course, they're wrong because FDIC insures you no matter where you are, big bank or little bank, but that doesn't mean that people are always making rational choices. So there's been more pressure on the smaller banks to try to win back some of that business from the big banks. And ways to do that are to be a bit more rational about what makes you different. So some of the commonalities that I've seen from the smaller banks, a lot of smaller community banks are like to pride themselves on being really friendly and not pushy. And that's because they think, oh, the big banks are pushy and they're always trying to push product. And that's annoying. So we'll be the nice, friendly bank. And that's not necessarily the best idea because it's not always as simple as that. From the surveys that I've seen in the banking benchmarks over the last half a dozen years, pushy is not always bad. So as a matter of fact, the very best banks, as reported by their own customers, actually are pushy. So you should be measuring and asking your customers, how pushy am I? But you also need to be asking, how proactive am I? Because you can be both at the same time. If you're just pushy without being proactive, that's bad. Proactive means you're leaning in and trying to help. And a lot of customers will say about a high-performing bank, yeah, they're pushy, but I understand they're just trying to help out, so that's good. I'm fine with that. They're genuinely trying to help me. Whereas if they emphasize on not being pushy, they can end up looking very passive. And that's actually a major driver of switching for customers in the United States when they say, my bank isn't really helping me out. They're nice, but they're just happy order takers. They're not making my financial life better. I'll tell you a story about this, give you an example. So I was presenting the customer experience results at a mid-sized community bank in Massachusetts a couple years ago. And their scores showed that their customers said that they were not pushy at all, but also not proactive at all. Really nice people, but like zero, like really, really low proactivity. So I presented the results to the board and to the C-suite, and they were like, okay, I'm glad they think we're nice, but we really need to be solving their issues. And then after presenting those results, the head of retail had me go into a different conference room, a much bigger conference room that had a whole lot more people in it. It was all of their branch managers, head tellers, assistant managers, stuff like that, a few dozen people in the room. And I basically presented the same results again and said, hey, your customers think that you're nice, but they think you're really not very proactive. You're not helping them out. And they were angry. This room got angry. It was really uncomfortable for me. They said, this can't be right. We love our customers. Of course we're helping them out. Your data must be wrong. It was interviews with thousands of their customers, but they just rated them very non-proactive. And like I said, it was very uncomfortable for me because people were really pushing back and viscerally angry. They said, that's not right. We love our customers. Your data must be wrong. Your data must be wrong. And before the end of the meeting, a few of the people said, we're going to prove to you that you're wrong. And they left. And the head of retail closed the door after everybody left. And I was in shell shock. And she said, thank you, Bruce. That's exactly how I wanted that meeting to go. And I was shocked because I thought that was terrible. A very contentious meeting. And she said, no, Bruce. We have for years been trying to get our frontline staff to be more proactive and to try to cross-sell and lean in and help. But they're not. They just want to be nice. And they think, oh, that's too salesy. But it's great. Now they've got the fact that the customers themselves are saying, you're not helping me out. And that's exactly what they need to hear. And she said that the management had been telling them for years, but the frontline staff had been saying, oh, they've been pushing back and say, no, we don't want to be pushy and we don't want to be salesy and stuff like that. But this was coming from the customer, so it was a very different perspective. So she was using that to change their behavior. And I tell you what, as contentious and as bad as that was, it was fantastic in retrospect, because within the next wave or two of the data, their customers started to report a real difference in the staff behavior. Started to say they're much more proactive, and they started to cross-sell more, and they started to increase their business because the frontline staff understood that pushy and proactive is okay. It really changed the culture of the organization. So, I mean, I wish the head of retail had told me beforehand, so I wasn't so blindsided and had such an uncomfortable meeting. But hey, it all worked out in the end. So that's just one example about how a bank needs to understand their market, understand what they're good at, and that's a way for a community bank to start to compete against some of the other banks in their market. Let me give you another example. I was working with a community bank that really wanted to increase their market share in commercial banking. They had a pretty low market share. I think they were number 8 in their market. And they were basically losing out to all the big banks. All the big banks were the most successful. You know, the Chase, Bank of America, Citizens, they're all very successful. And they were way behind at number 8. So what they did is they took a look at the local data to see what those banks were strong at and weak at in the commercial area. And it turns out there were 3 places that the bigger banks weren't performing well. They were not very responsive, they were not proactive, and their rates were not very good. And so this community bank was a fairly large community bank, let's say about 35-40 million. 35-40 billion. They said, okay, so that's what they're not good at. What are we good at? And they said, we know from our commercial customers, they tell us we're very responsive. So we know we can tell people that we're responsive. And we're also very proactive. So that's great. But our community bank or our commercial customers, they don't think our rates are that great. So they decided, okay, we know the weaknesses, the 3 weaknesses of all the big banks in the areas, and we know we're actually really good at 2 of those things, but not the others. So they didn't focus on rates. So they started running TV campaigns that just hammered home, we are responsive, we are proactive. We are responsive, we are proactive. If you need a bank that helps your business by being responsive and proactive, we're the ones. Responsive, proactive. They just hammered on that over and over again. And it worked. Within, I think, about 24 months, they had gone from the number 8 commercial lender in their area all the way to number 1. And that's because they understood the weaknesses of their competitors based on market research, and they understood their own strengths and places where they weren't strong, again, from their own market research. So that's an example of how a community bank used market research to really eat the lunch of the big banks.
Love that.
So let's talk about the types of questions that banks should and should not be asking as part of their customer experience measurement programs. Let's start with kind of the more interesting side. What are the wrong questions to ask?
Let's start at the highest level. Again, as I mentioned, I've worked with hundreds of banks and credit unions, from the very biggest to the smallest. And one of the things that you learn after doing this for a while is when you ask, what makes you different? Almost all of them say the same thing. They say, hey, Bruce, what really truly makes our institution different is our customer service. We have the best people. We have the best customer service. And they believe that. And then the next bank says, you know what makes us different? Our customer service. We have the best customer service. And again and again and again. I'd say at least 90% of banks believe that they have the best customer service. And that's what they think. They really think they're the best at customer service. And that's even if they do survey their own customers. Because if they survey their own customers, they generally get pretty high scores on customer service. So does it make sense that it can be the unique strength for everybody? No. Could they all be right? No. So one of the things that I do when I speak at large conventions or conferences, banking conferences, is I have a little trick that I do if I'm in front of maybe 500 bank CEOs. I say, okay, everybody, raise your hand if you think that your customer service stinks. If it's below average, if it's no good, raise your hand. Room full of 500 bank CEOs, nobody ever raises their hand. Not once. So then I say, okay, so nobody's below average. How many of you think your customer service is mediocre? Just average, not good, not bad, just average. And generally about a few hands will go up. A few brave people will raise their hands. Never more than, say, 2 or 3%. So then I say, okay. So we've got 500 banks represented in this room. 0% of you are below average. 2% of you are average. 98% of everybody is above average. Does that make sense to everybody? And it's good because that sort of gets people thinking, can we all be above average? Is this like Lake Wobegon?